Next, from Springfield, we attend a committee hearing on whether to close the Illinois State Museum as part of Governor Rauner's proposed budget cuts. This runs about 20 minutes.
And as we said, I'm the director of Illinois Department of Natural Resources, and first and foremost, I want to emphasize that no one likes to make cuts to programs and facilities, and IDNR has seen its share of cuts over the past 12 years. And we would prefer not to have to appear before you today, but as the governor noted in his veto message, the majority party leaders in the General Assembly have admitted that the General Assembly's fiscal year 16 budget passed at the end of May is unbalanced. The Governor's Office of Management and Budget concurs in calculating that the budget the governor vetoed was approximately $4 billion out of balance. Some have said the museum's budget is a drop in the bucket and won't do much to help solve the deficit. The problem is, as you all know, is that there are many items in the state budget that are locked in by law, such as pensions, debt service, Medicaid rates, and payments to local governments. Consent decrees must be complied with for human services and public safety programs. The budget structure with items locked in statute greatly reduces available options to reduce spending to balance the budget. And while the museum budget may seem small at $6.29 million, its budget is 1/6 of the general revenue funds received by IDNR. As general revenue appropriations have been falling, the museum's share of IDNR's available general revenue fund has been rising. In 2002, it was 4% of our general revenue fund, and currently it's 16.1% of the general revenue fund for IDNR. Therefore, funding for the State Museum, which is an important cultural and historic asset of the state, is left exposed. I know you have a lot of questions about this process, so I'd like to address some of the frequently asked questions up front. Questions have been raised about IDNR's ability to close the museums by state statute. IDNR's legal department has looked at the issue closely and determined there is no state or federal statute that would prevent the closure of the museum to the public. I also understand that the museum donors are concerned about items in the state's care. The IDNR is committed throughout this process to be certain that collections are safely stored and that a small staff is kept on to maintain proper conditions for artifacts and artwork. The remaining staff also will provide access to Native American remains and artifacts as required by state and federal statute. Lastly, I want to acknowledge that I received the letter from the Commission dated June 30th that expressed concern that the State Museum branch was moving too quickly to cancel summer programming. The Illinois State Museum Director made those changes without consulting IDNR, and immediately upon receipt of this letter, I asked the Director to restore canceled programs and cease any other closure actions prior to the Commission completing its work. These are challenging times for the state of Illinois, and we ask for your patience as we work through these financial crises so we can emerge stronger and better prepared for the future. Thank you. If you have any questions, I'll take those now.
Thank you, Director. We'll go to members of COGFO for questions. Senator Kaler.
Thank you, Director. What kind of decision-making process did you go through? Did you actually consider the economic impact on the communities that are affected by these closures? And did you also consider what lost revenues or opportunities there might be because of the closures?
Well, those are all things we work with the Governor's Office of Management and Budget, and so we worked through those with them. And even though that may be economic impact to the state, those are not funds that come into DNR, and they don't become part of our general revenue funds.
But the impact of money coming in that people bring with them when they're tourists to Illinois, support jobs, support local communities, support the tax base, et cetera, et cetera. So you can't really divorce that from...
Correct. And like I say, you know, we worked with the Office of Management and Budget, and when you look at all those things, we still have a $4 billion hole. Like I say, we'd not like to be here, but somehow we have to figure out how to working with the Governor's Office to fill that $4 billion deficit, unless they come up with a budget, in which case then we'd relook at everything.
So this is temporary in your estimation?
I would hope so.
Well, then what appears to me is that this is part of this circus around the budget that the governor has created.
Not if we don't end up with a balanced budget. If we still end up with a $4 billion hole, then, you know, these cuts are just part of the first 20% of the $4 billion. This, we're talking about $800 million out of the $4 billion. So if we have to go through and if the unbalanced budget of $4 billion gets overridden, and we have to live with that, then we have to continue to make these cuts. But until we have the revenue and the appropriations, that's where we're at.
Well, I guess this just needs to be pointed out then. This is just part of the circus that's going on around the budget.
Does that conclude your comments, Senator Kaler? Representative Necritz.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. There's a couple of us on COGFA who have been through a lot of
Sure.
these facility closure hearings, and I have to say that the information put forth by DNR this time was pretty slim compared to the information we've gotten with the other facilities closures, and I don't know the reason for that, but I wanted to go through some of the statutory requirements that I think you all are obligated under the Facility Closures Act to provide, and where I think we're still lacking information. The statute requires the total number of employees by site, which I think you did provide, but then you're obligated under the statute to say what are the impacts on those employees, and you say that most, I think was the word that you used, will be laid off. Can you provide me some specifics on what most means?
If we go to a skeletal crew, where we're just going to close it to the public and maintain the artifacts and artwork, we would be probably most likely looking at 3 individuals. So everyone else would be laid off.
Is that a total of 3 across all 5
Yes.
sites? Okay, and
Yes.
would those 3 be in Springfield? Would you anticipate?
They would most likely be in Springfield and Dixon Mounds, because those are the 3 facilities that would require individuals there to maintain the climate control and the artifacts themselves. So it'd be the Resource Center, the Illinois State Museum here in Springfield, and Dixon Mounds. The other 3 would not.
Okay. Then second, the statute again requires that you provide the operating cost of the closing of the facilities and other budget impacts. And there's, to my understanding, there are lots of other budget impacts. We'd have the loss of any federal grants and other revenues that are flowing in as a result of the closure of those facilities. Did you detail any of that in the information you provided?
No.
So I think that's something that,
Okay.
that the commission
We
ought
can
to
get that
have.
for you,
Okay, that would be
Representative.
great. And then probably most distressing to me was the economic impact study. Again, when we've gotten this in the past, I think that the agency may have gone out and hired someone to actually do an economic impact study of what is the loss to the communities where the facility is located. And in this case, I have to think with the tourism dollars and the lack of the ability to utilize the facilities for research, which they clearly have been based on a lot of comments that I read. The economic impact study seemed very, very slim to me. And so I would hope that, again, as the commission goes through this process of making a decision, that we would be in a position to really understand what the economic impact is going to be to the communities where the museums are going to be closed. Was there a reason that you did not do more of an economic impact analysis?
Well, because we don't have those individuals to start with, and what we did is took the Office of Tourism numbers, which they say it has an impact of 17 million.
But I think that was only for Springfield.
Yes.
So there's 4 other facilities that are going to be impacted by this.
Yeah, and if you look at the number of visitors, those are minor compared to Springfield itself.
Well, I don't doubt that they're minor compared to Springfield, but they may be major for the communities in which they're located. I mean, I had the good fortune of riding down on the train with the mayor of Lockport, and I think we'll hear from him, but this is a very significant part of his economic development for downtown Lockport, and I think that needs to be part of the consideration when we're looking, and again, it's all required under the statute to do a real economic analysis, which again, I don't feel like the department did in providing the commission the information that we need to make the kind of decision that I think that you would want us to make. And then lastly, I think the Facilities Closure Act requires a statement on the impact on state services, and you just simply indicate that it will be closed to visitors. and say that, and provide the number of visitors that will be at each site. Can you provide us a timeline on how some of those closures might be done, and the layoffs, and what you anticipate in terms of the folks that will be retained to deal with the collections that we have? I mean, I just think, again, that's important information for us to have.
My understanding,
as we
going through the
close
process, once you initiate it, it takes about 60 days to lay off the individual employees, going through the whole process.
And how does that impact the $1.5 million that basic around numbers that you say you're going to
The
save?
$1.5 million is what it would take to continue to operate the facilities.
Okay. So how would those layoffs and what you anticipate doing in order to be able to handle the collections and deal with those kinds of things, does it impact those?
Because the layoffs is what creates the savings of $4.8 million. The 1.6 is what it takes to continue to operate the facilities, maintain the temperature controls and the climate controls and everything else.
So would you say that the $1.5 million is adequate, or that those 3 people that you're going to be retaining, are those adequate to deal with all the collections and all everything that's going to continue to
Correct.
be done at the museums?
Yes.
All right.
Well, we also have security contracts for the,
But those are not curators.
no.
Got it, okay. So I took a glance through the comments, and again, having gone through a number of these hearings, when we had hearings on closing some of the facilities for the developmentally disabled and prisons and so forth, there were actually some advocates for closing some of those facilities. And I didn't look through all 170 pages of comments, but I looked through about 110 of them. And I didn't see anybody supporting this closure. Are you aware of any groups or anybody?
I don't think anybody questions the fact that the museums are important for educational purposes. Nobody questions that. It's the fact that we got a $4 billion hole and we got to figure out how to fix it, and we're working with the Office of Management.
I think we have ideas on how to fix it. They just aren't very well received on the second floor.
Well, I can understand that. So we're working and doing our part in managing the revenue that we have available.
So here's just a comment on that, Director, is that I think that the Democrats have been very clear that we're willing to close that gap, but we need some help doing it. And my understanding is that the governor does not want to raise revenue. So this gap exists. I mean, if he got his way, seems to me you would be doing this regardless of whether or not we appropriated the revenue to do it, because that is, I mean, I don't know how you close the gap that he has out there without raising revenue, and in which case you have to do a lot of these kinds of things, especially when we're raising, I mean, I support education, and I guess I'm happy that we raised the money going to education, but maybe we could take a little bit out of that education money that we gave, that the governor wanted more money for education, and put it in here to provide for education, so that we don't have all the other impacts that are going to flow from closing these facilities. So just throw that out there as an idea. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Representative. Representative Burke.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. Director, some of the comments you've made have made it unclear to me whether the governor is trying to permanently close the museum or whether this is a temporary
I expect
measure.
it would be temporary whenever we had the revenues to reopen them. So when that is, I mean, your guess is as good as mine on that.
I don't know if hell freezes over is a date, according to what the governor's philosophy, but so let's walk through what a temporary closure would mean and what purpose it would serve. It seems to me that there's the artifacts and exhibits would just be cared for,
They would
and
be cared
no one
for.
would ever see. Are there plans to sell
No.
or otherwise give away any of the artifacts and
No.
exhibits?
Other than return those that are requested to be returned.
And how many requests has the department received for the return of those?
None that I know of.
None at this point. And do you have any idea what the number of loaned artifacts is that
I do
might
not.
possibly be returned?
I do not.
Okay. Has there been any discussion between opening it and keeping it open with the current budget structure and closure? Are there not other avenues that you could explore, that the department could explore in order to increase revenue directly for the museum?
You know, when we passed the sustainability bill in 2012, we authorized the museum to charge, and obviously that was before I got there, and my understanding is that they were adamantly opposed to that, but I think going forward that would be one of the things that we'd have to look at. Based on their numbers of 200,000 visitors in Springfield, at $5 a head for adults, that would be $1 million that would bring in. So that would be something we'd have to look at and figure out if we could do that or not.
Some of the comments that I've received locally, even though I don't represent any of the areas, you know, that have facilities affected, but I've heard from people in my area that the museum provides very vital research to other smaller regional museums, and that if it were to close, it would have a very detrimental effect, especially on historical museums, local museums of that nature. What provisions would be made for that sort of community outreach?
As long as it's temporarily closed, none.
So let's say it's not.
Yeah, as long as
Temporary.
we're just in a caretaker status, we wouldn't have the ability to do that.
So how do you think this is going to affect the state's, the state and the facilities, the institutions' credibility with donors, with grantors, with folks who might want to lend artifacts? If people feel that you're playing games with the state's heritage?
I can't answer that. I don't know.
It just seems very short-sighted. I understand we're in a budget crunch, but it just seems that there are much more creative ways to help get the museum to where it needs to be than proposing a closure that may or may not apparently be temporary. And as you can see, there's many, many people who are interested in this issue. They're lined up outside. And I'm guessing just from the comments that I've read that they're all here in opposition. So I would urge the governor and the department to take a second look at whether they want to move forward on this. Thank you.